So we have the diminution and evil. The diminution of the property of goodness is what's called evil. Good has substantial being, evil does not. And this is the way that Augustine wants it defined. And he has a pretty good basis for defining it in this way. He's going to say it's like a moral hole, a nothingness that results when goodness is removed. It's just as a shadow is no more than a hole in light, evil is a hole in goodness. So one more problem with seeing evil as a thing, and I kind of mentioned this before, we tend to see people who are evil in the same way as Manichaeans struggle between good and evil. It makes us think that either it is something outside ourselves, or that we either are or are not. Remember, Aristotle said that your character, you're not a liar by birth. It's something that you learn, you choose to do. The Coen brothers in The Simple Plan go through the man who has a wife who's going to have a baby, and he's got a good job, and he's got enough money, and he's got a house, but he wants that money, and everything that he does, he makes that choice to have that money, and that is first and foremost for him. So we see that that people want, they make certain choices, and that's what Augustine wants to go for, and what Aristotle and Plato would say is that you have choices in those things. They can't remove those from you. So we have to accept that those are a part of us. This leads us to the idea that evil people are strong and can be idolized, such as Tony Soprano, Adolf Hitler. Augustine and Arendt both see this as a big mistake. Instead, evil people are people who are incomplete and limited. And Hannah Arendt is someone we'll talk about later. They really have the potentia, but they never actualize it. And they're really nothing more than moral slackers. Evil, then, is the act itself of choosing the lesser good. To Augustine, the source of evil is in the free will of persons. And I strained to perceive what I now heard, that free will was the cause of our ill-doing. Evil was a perversion of the will, turned aside from God to lesser things. And Plato would say the same thing. He would say, when you're thinking about the intelligible world, you're no longer focused on the passions. You're trying to get that harmony. And so Augustine changes these things toward God and would say God is the good. Plato says for the good, you would be looking towards not the material things, but the intelligible things. That's where the real world really is. In Harry Potter, and you'll see that in the book, but I want to mention this just a little bit in the video that we were talking about. Evil in Harry Potter is not a substance, is not a thing. It's always looking for a host. It attaches to people who are in process. And when they kind of give that up, then he feeds off that kind of thing. Even in the first book, Harry goes under the sorting hat, and the hat says Gryffindor and Slytherin, you could be great. The idea is that we are all internally grappling with the choice, and that choice has yet to be made. It brings us to the idea of free will. So the challenge that God would have created a world with free will creatures, immutable in their goodness, is answered by the notion of plenitude, the greatest good. The possibility of evil also makes a greater good possible. This is not one of the more convincing arguments I find, but I'll throw it out there, and you can play with it and think about it. It's going to be, God made a world in which true moral decision-making and development of virtues is possible in humans, manifest by persons whose characters form through growth and struggling. And I would go with that. The other one, the greater good idea, I'm just not sure if you have an all-knowing, all good, an all-powerful God, that the idea of the greater good really matters to him. I think that's a more finite idea that we like, because that's the best option that we have in our finiteness. Virtues, evil, and free will. For example, certain virtues couldn't exist without evil: courage, mercy, forgiveness, patience, the giving of comfort. And I think, I wouldn't even say evil, but the idea that you could choose to do the evil. So the idea of long-suffering, I mean, we know what it's not to do those things. And when you strive to strike the mean on those, I think those virtues do come about. They are elements of character that can be had by moral souls. And we understand that being a moral slacker, I don't have to do any of those. It's a whole lot easier. Just as evil is a result of acts of the will, so is virtue. And this is really Augustine's idea. Acts of moral choice accomplish both. Certainly quite a few objections and problems, but probably the best are raised by atheist philosophers J.L. Mackie and Anthony Flew. They're more substantial. Anthony Flew actually, I don't know if he became a theist towards the end of his life, but he certainly changed his ideas on some of this stuff that he had said previously. Um, for that's what that's worth. If you're interested, you can take a look at it. Isn't it possible that God could have created man, immutable in his goodness, yet still have the opportunity to freely choose another area? So we always choose goodness instead of choosing evil. Wouldn't that be more interesting if God did that? You know, like we have free will, but we can't choose to do the evil. Will man have immutable goodness in heaven, and will he not also have freedom to choose among certain options? Why not here on earth? And couldn't God construct man's nature so that such that evil simply was not an option? And certainly they're right in one sense, but freedom in a larger sense, the ability to make choices, does not require freedom in the narrow sense. So we do have moral choices. You can pick these arguments up as we go along, but you know, the highest good, the best of all possible, requires more than just general freedom. It requires moral freedom, and that necessarily entails the possibility of evil. So look through those. If they're convincing to you, great. If not, it really is beyond what we want to do in here. And it's certainly a larger discussion for a history of philosophy or philosophical issues class. And I might even just move on, but the last part, Augustine is first and foremost a theologian, but he sets a stage for others to take up the challenge of defending their faith. This is refreshing, considering that we often don't do this. I think there is a better group of philosophers who are now engaged in such a thing. But philosophers did not, and theologians did not see themselves as separate, and scientists didn't see themselves separately in medieval times. They all thought that they were working together on the same problems. Now we've all split off into our different groups, and I'm not a fan of that. I think there's much more we can gain by working together. So if we are indeed looking for the truth, then we must be looking at all things and not simply declaring some things to be false. I think we miss something very rich and profound in ignoring religion, just as present-day theologians are missing out on the rigorousness of philosophy and science. So I think both can be had. That said, that's it for Augustine.